All roads lead to power. And on this show, we're going to break that idea down a little bit. What is power? Who has it? And how do you get it? I'm your host, Jeff Coulard. Welcome to the show.
It's a realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, and that love without power is sentimental and anemic.
Because the so-called real world of men and money and power hums merrily along on the fuel of fear and anger and frustration and craving and the worship of self. The really important kind of freedom involves attention and awareness and discipline.
If people don't learn power, people don't wake up. And if they don't wake up, they get left out.
Okay, welcome back to another episode of Powerful. My name is Jeff Coulard and I'm your host. And today I'm really excited about a friend and colleague of mine, Pablo Romero, who I've done a lot of work with over the past couple of years. And I learn something new every time we sit down to have a chat about human-centered design, the employee experience, and leadership in life more broadly. So I'm excited to have him on the show to chat about all of those things and probably more. Pablo, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for carving out some time on a Monday night to sit down and chat all of those things with me.
Thanks for having me. As I said, this is my first podcast interview. So a bit nervous, but equally excited and couldn't be in safer hands.
Awesome. Well, thank you for choosing to do your first one here on the show on Powerful. So awesome. Let's dig into it a little bit. Let's introduce the audience to you. What's your background, and kind of when people ask you, what do you do? How do you answer that question these days?
Yeah, it depends. I wear a lot of hats, Jeff, as a father, husband, and professional. But if we're focusing on the work stuff, I love to design and develop resilient, adaptive, and what I call game-changing teams. And then that kind of spurs me into some conversation. My background, I actually started off educational-wise, economics and sociology. And from there, kind of launched off into customer experience and as you know, the marketing and the brand space. Had a quite the experience, workplace experience, which then transitioned me into taking what I learned in designing exceptional experiences for consumers in-house for employees.
Can we talk about that? Can we dig into that piece of the journey? Because I think strikes me like it's a fairly, like we all have critical points in the path that are kind of game changers for us and our trajectory. And I know you had a pretty significant one. So can you fill us in on what that path was like and maybe some of the learnings or the insights that came out of that for you?
Yeah. Oh boy. It's funny. My wife, before we were married, used to call me Pablo Overdo It Romero. I did everything fast and quick, my career was a great example of that, where, I was, fresh into the work world, joined an organization that was, really playing that finite game, all about achievement in the sense of, money, status, power, just like your show is called. And it was addictive as a young person. And so that took me really fast through my career without having the proper mentorship, coaching, supports. I mean, I was 4? Like, come on now. Anyways, the opportunity had me move to the other side of the world in Singapore with an investment firm, real estate investment firm. And, not to speak bad about the organization, because I've gained so much through my experience there, but it was a highly stressful workplace. Especially when you take, the mindset that I had at that age. And it was a very competitive one. And it was the analogy, the carrot and the stick. That's exactly what it was. And it was done very well. Fast forward, I was basically constantly going every day to work and after work, carrying this high level of stress. And for me, it's fight. So everything looks good on the outside and everything inside is just taking the beating, right? And so, I was doing well on the outside, rising to the occasion through that fight response that I had, but I was slowly deteriorating. And in 2009, I got news that I had ulcerative colitis. And for those of you who don't know what ulcerative colitis is, it's considered autoimmune. Basically, my large intestine thought something was going on. My body was in this state of stress, and it starts attacking itself. And so you've got ulcers, you can't keep anything in, you're losing blood internally. You feel like, you've got arthritis. Yeah, from a guy who played competitive soccer, always was healthy and fit his whole life, to just be humbled and brought back, grounded. It was tough. And that was my turning point. Actually being afraid to die.
Yeah, it's amazing what that will do for perspective shifting. That's something when you go from like invincible to suddenly invincible, or like suddenly there's like some really, I had a similar turning point in my journey. It was diabetes for me, also autoimmune, also probably stress induced, right? So I think that, there's a theory that out there that, the body keeps the score when it comes to stress. The body's going to like just keep track of all of the shit that we put ourselves through, and eventually something's going to give. If it's not our emotional wellness and our mental wellness, it's our physical wellness, or it's both, right? Like sometimes it hits us in both ways. So 2009, you were diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. What was the journey like from there, and kind of where are you now? It's kind of a decade or so later. What changed for you?
Yeah, so 2009, I get diagnosed. It starts to get worse and worse. I'm taking medication, but no one really knows much about the disease at that time. So they're like, take this pill, continue on. High levels of stress, going to work every day in fear of getting fired for saying or doing the wrong thing, starting to have a conscious or more consciousness about my core values, starting to explore those, being scared about death really opens you up to, am I truly living right now? Right. Our good friend Ernest introduced us to the book, The Untethered Soul. I mean, shit, like if you knew you're going to die at the end of the week, would you be living the way you are right now? I bet most of us would probably answer no. Right. And so, I was going to work like that every day. I had a baby on the way. My relationship, my wife was about to leave me because I was working 16-hour days. So I was going to lose, the love of my life. Our dog, like this is all happening at once. This is why I talk about resiliency and adaptiveness. Our dog, our first baby, Singa, she got super sick, poisoned, and had a 20% chance of survival. So all these things were coming down on us at once. And we literally looked at each other, my wife and I, and we said, can we swear on this thing? Fuck it. Like this is not the path that we know that we should be on right now. And so we decided to just stop that, quit, get on a plane, and come back home. And I was back home, and I think my body caught up, and it just went full blown. And so just so you know, with severe colitis, you go to the bathroom like 40 times a day. You can't get anything done. never mind all the other things in between. So that was my lowest point in terms of, and I wanted to, for me, I remember at that time there was that Rumi quote. Are you familiar with that one? Where the wound is the place where the light enters you. And Laura was super spiritual, and I think that's what kind of moved me into this spiritual journey. And for me, spirituality is, it's about connection, deep connection with the other people that are in my life, and how many people can I connect with in this world. And this, I'm a connector. I'm on a mission to meet as many people as I can, and see if I can impact their lives in one way or the other. And so, I use this to kind of take all my skills, my experience, and start to apply it to my life, designing my life and my career, which put me on the path of, wow, do workplaces not have a duty and a service to the people that they're supposed to care for and the communities that they're a part of? And so that's, if you want to call it, my personal passion and my purpose has been on that journey, which has led me to great people like you.
Mm-hmm. It's the mission that you're on these days, is to rehabilitate the workplace experience, I think, for people, because it doesn't have to burn us out. It doesn't have to stress us out to the point where we're having to choose, health over work, or health over, making the impact that we want to make in the world. Awesome. Those of you who are tuned in live, feel free to ask us questions anytime. Drop a comment if you want to learn more about a particular thing. If I missed something important and you're like, hey, hold on, you need to ask Pablo this, make sure you drop that question into the comments, and we'll throw it up on the screen, and we'll chat with it. But maybe let's shift gears just a little bit into some of the things that I promised people we would talk about, and I'm always interested in, which is some of the work that you're doing now these days and have been for the past kind of decade or so around this employee experience, human-centered design, and building these game-changing teams. And so, why don't we start with like maybe some of the pieces or things that you see in organizations that you think need to change, or what are some of the commonalities amongst our companies and our organizations that aren't contributing to adaptive capacity, aren't contributing to wellness for the workforce or for the people that they serve. Do you have anything that kind of jumps to mind as far as like, if you could change a couple of things, what would you go in, or what do you find yourself talking a lot about?
Yeah, I would say I've been thinking about this lately in terms, of the work you, myself, and Kim are doing, and just even in our process as a team going through these motions. I mean, we've built up a lot of psychological safety, which for me it's an environment that you and I and Kim feel like we can take interpersonal risks with each other because we're vulnerable. We feel seen and heard, and so we've got these great foundational elements that I know a lot of organizations out there have. And so we've got cohesion, we've got harmony, we've got alignment. But I think one thing that a lot of these organizations are missing is the tension. Like, man, the tension, that's like, especially with all this, work that organizations are doing around diversity and inclusion, tension is the diversity with the inclusion. Otherwise, I love the analogy. I think IDEO uses it. Otherwise, it's like a leaky cup. You've got the diversity, you're filling it in, but the inclusion's not there, so it's all falling out. And tension is that way for organizations and their teams to really get into those conversations, to really truly innovate and create in a diverse way. So I would say tension is one thing I would love to see organizations doing more, like getting into that healthy tension. You and Kim have done an amazing job at creating some tools, strategies around breaking through artificial harmony. Like, I think that's so important right now. Sorry, you're going to say something?
Well, I was just going to ask you about like the tension piece. Like when you're describing tension, is that like differences of opinion, differences of like what creates the tension, and because a lot of people like, so conflict, if we just jump into conflict for a second, kind of lives on a spectrum, right? And you've identified artificial harmony, so that lives on the one side where we kind of avoid conflict and we're not really digging into it. There's unhealthy conflict. We've probably all experienced that in our life, where it's not super productive, right? Like
Judgment.
The tension is there. There's judgment, and there's tone of voice, and there's like no solutions out of it. It's just venting and complaining maybe. There's a sweet spot in the middle there, which is that productive tension. But like, what does that do for an organization? You mentioned innovation, but what are some of the benefits of like really digging in? What have you seen when teams are able to really dig into the tensions that exist amongst the membership or amongst the team? What happens for that team?
Yeah, I mean, for one, and this is going to be, from the heart, right? It's just that deeper level of connection with the people that you're spending your days with. The people that are, like a second family, maybe even to you, right? So I think that just deepening relationships with the people that you're working towards something great with, like that's a nice first benefit. Other than that, like you said, it's the innovation and the ideation. I can't tell you how many times I've thought like that I know something, and that I figured it out, and then I have a really great conversation with tension and conflict and different perspectives, and my mind's changed. And when your mind's changed, that's a beautiful thing, because they can open up so many other doors. It's opened up doors in finding new strengths and skill sets that I never thought I could develop, right? Because like around coaching and mentoring, so I think tension opens up doors to other opportunities that you otherwise wouldn't have seen. And I think tension is something you can do with yourself. I've done it. I've been in hospital rooms for a long time, going crazy, talking to myself, right, and journaling, and I've held those moments of tension with myself. So,
yeah, that we talked Kimberly and I did a webinar just this week, I think, or last week around, and there's kind of those three places that tension can show up, or harmony, like this artificial harmony can show up in like interpersonal relationships, one-on-one with people, in like a team environment, but also within self, right? We can develop this like status quo, don't lean into the tension in our own life and get to this place of values and congruence, right? So we're caring about one thing, but acting in a different way. And I actually think if I have to point to like the root of a lot of dysfunction in our lives, it's that. It's values tension. It's values incongruence. It's
Yes.
I care about this thing, but I'm behaving in a way that's like would indicate that I didn't care about that thing, right? Or vice versa. But it's that tension there that causes the stress that we find ourselves under often, and then leaks out into all kinds of unhelpful ways in our own life.
Yeah, and you know that type of like even like ourselves going through it, like there's moments it's uncomfortable and it can be tiring, but once you break through it, like just to answer your question, man, the innovation, the ideation, the creativity, and by creativity I don't mean like an art, like it could be artistic, but I just mean anything. It could be a perspective, a behavior, an experience, a service, a product. I've just seen teams just, first of all, they become more highly engaged. Second of all, there's higher levels of trust. They, you know, like there's a great podcast actually by, I think it's Adam Grant and with Trevor Noah. I'll try to get these resources up for people.
Awesome.
And it talks about how his team comes in every day and through their system of they call it bursting, where they're just working so well together with tension and they're able to create an amazing show. I mean, if you like it, it's an amazing show.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I love that. You know, the one thing I will point out about tension is, and I tend to have this is I want to fix problems, right? I love problems, and we all love them. And what I've realized, and part of this was through my health journey, but also just, you know, with getting into tension actually with others, is not every problem can be solved. And sometimes it's about just being there for somebody or helping them manage that problem. Or as Kim puts it, I love this, dancing with the problem. And so that's probably been, I would say, in the last 5 years of my career is a big lesson that was like, whoa, I don't need to solve these problems. In fact, they're not solvable.
Or they're not my problem.
Or they're not my problem. Yeah, yeah.
That's a turning point in and of itself.
Yeah.
Is realizing what problems are mine and what's somebody else's and choosing which ones I'm going to tackle.
For sure. And this is chamomile tea, by the way.
You can swear and you can drink on this podcast. It's a late night show. It's 8:30. The kids are in bed.
All right.
Yeah, I think that point. Like, we won't hit conflict too hard because we'll probably do some other podcasts around that. I would love to get to some of these other pieces that we can chat about. But you know, the one thing I think around tension in organizations and conflict in particular is when we step back from the desire or the objective of solving the problem, of solving the conflict, to simply understanding it. Right? If we can create the space that can we understand this tension and what it means for the people that are in the room, that's 95% of the work, right? Once you get real with each other and you have a real conversation about what this tension means, right? Then we can take that problem and locate it and we can work together towards it, because so often we internalize tensions and we think that they're a problem with us, right? Like I am the problem, or somebody else on the team is the problem, and we really individualize it, right? And I think that the first step in really getting through tensions is to externalize it and say, actually, this problem exists, and we can name it and we can like work on it together.
Yeah, and actually, that's a great transition over to human-centered design, because a lot of the time, people like, when we're working with clients through human-centered design, they think they have a problem, but they're really explaining like the solution that they want.
Or the
right?
symptom of a problem.
Or the symptoms of it, right? Yeah. Sorry, the one other thing I will say that I feel organizations need more of these days, and this is something that I think people are noticing nowadays when they're at home. You know, you're wearing so many hats and, you know, switching all through those hats throughout the day, but your environment's not switching. So mentally that's heavy. Is just moments of mindfulness. So if organizations can help to create those moments, you know, those safe spaces where people can reflect, I think right now people are panicked for various reasons. You know, I got to look like I'm busy, you know, or, oh, we're short of staff now, I got to pick up the slack. And so everybody's in a reaction mode. And reaction mode, you know, sometimes people get comfortable with that, right? If we're busy, we don't actually have to change and transform. And so I would challenge organizations to create those, create space for mindfulness so that you can challenge yourself to grow. Because I've seen too many organizations say, I'm too busy for that right now. I'm overwhelmed. And where is that going to get you?
Yeah. I think there's an old Buddhist saying that's, everyone should meditate for 20 minutes a day unless they don't have time, and then they should meditate for 2 hours. Right? And I don't do enough meditating or mindfulness, so this is a good reminder for me to dig into that practice a bit more. What do you do for mindfulness? What are some of your practices?
Yeah, so I'm married to a counseling psychologist who was first off a Reiki master and Zen Shiatsu practitioner. So I've seen different ways to practice mindfulness. Her and I are so different, my wife Laura and I. Mine, honestly, for me, is taking a walk outside. Just like the way the air smells, being in the trees, even sometimes going with my daughters, just that connection to nature that it grounds me. And I've done some of my best reflection there. So I don't think mindfulness is necessarily something you have to sit cross-legged with lotus leaves or flowers in the background with some great music. I mean, I've done that, and that's, I'm not that flexible, so it doesn't work for me. But honestly, it's just finding that state where, you can be grateful for the things that you have. I feel like, and I still find myself doing this. You think of achievement and being sick. There's times where I have to shake my head because I'm like thinking, oh, I was sick for 10 years. I've got 10 years to make up from. It's like, well, what am I going after? I've learned most of the, important experiences throughout this. Like, be grateful for this, sit with this, and so, even someone I think who's gone through things like you and I have with our health, we still need to make space for this because we get caught in the game.
Totally. Yeah. No, I'm guilty of that. And I think this morning, actually, I was trying to get my newsletter out the door because it's Monday and that's what I do. And my 3-year-old was poking at me and petitioning for my attention. And I'm like, what am I trying to achieve here? Like, why? This is just a to-do on my checklist. Like, what could possibly be more important today than going and playing Lego right now with my son? Right? Nothing. And so it's that moment-to-moment awareness, I think, and keeping our values as close to the forefront of our consciousness, because otherwise it's really easy to get disconnected from them, and it's easy to get onto the status quo and just the treadmill. At least for me, anyway. Finding ways to remind myself of my values has helped to guide my behavior and reduce the tension that exists when we're operating kind of misaligned with that, or the friction that comes from that.
I totally agree. I was gonna say, like, probably what I think takes the most guts is getting to your core values, the ones that are non-negotiable and won't change with whatever happens externally. And I like to tell people, like, it took me losing my guts. It actually took my guts, 5 feet of them. I had to have surgery after, my battle with ulcerative colitis. I made the decision to do that because I had to let something go to gain something. And you know what? And here's the gratitude. I've recently found out a lot of my dad's family is in Peru, so there's not too many documented records on health, but there's colon cancer there. 2 of his brothers have passed away, and then numerous cousins have had issues with colon cancer. So, me sitting here with ulcers in my large intestine for 10 more years, who knows what that could have led to? And so, I'm grateful that I'm healthy where I'm at right now, and I have the relationships I have. So,
yeah, the relationship with the illness. I don't know where you're at with yours, but a turning point for me was and it happened fairly quickly for me because my biological father actually passed away when I was just over a year old, a big heart attack, and turns out might have been some pre-diabetes and those types of things. It kind of runs around the family a little bit, heart conditions and things. And so for me, it's like, and I was diagnosed late 20s. And so that was a turning point for me. It's like, oh shit, like this is actually a great thing. Like this is a daily reminder. I've got a patch in my arm that sends blood sugar readings to my phone so that I'm constantly reminded of the need to eat well, exercise, and keep my stress down, right? And I don't know what better gift you could get in your late 20s than that, right? As opposed to, waiting to have that heart attack when you're 40 or 50 after you've, neglected yourself for so long. So for me anyway, that was a turning point.
Yeah, and imagine what that's going to mean for our children to grow up with a different sense of, well-being, right? Sleep, the importance of sleep. Man, I know there's differing opinions on sleep, but for me, I need it, and I've noticed a huge difference. And then nutrition, I like Jeff. Both of us have a certain nutrition that we follow to feel nourished and healthy. And so where I'm at with my, I guess, journey with ulcerative colitis is I'm considered colitis free because they took it out of me. But I still have, it's been 3 years. I had 3 surgeries. I had to have actually an ostomy, a bag for a portion of a year, which for a young fit guy was really messed with my. And then I was on prednisone, which you can't tell now, but my face, I mean, I already have a big jaw. Imagine this thing on prednisone. Looked like a microphone. And so, but it really messed with my self-confidence, or at least what I thought my self-confidence was at the time. Not feeling attractive to my wife, having to go out and wear a bathing suit, like all the things that a lot of people go through for in their world as well. But it was just a humbling experience. So where I'm at now is I still need to practice mindfulness, right? Because I don't know about you, but I've got this competitive nature in myself, and as long as it's about nourishment and not achievement, and my values are being met, I feel like I'm thriving.
Awesome. Yeah, cool. Yeah, I think both of those things. I think mindfulness in the workplace and not the cross-legged chanting to something. If that works for people, that's
If that
great.
works.
Again, but I think it's the awareness, right? The intentional awareness and the gratitude practices, and like there's a plethora of different mindfulness, I think, techniques and practices that certainly have helped me and sound like they've helped you. And I think there's actually really good research around it. We were doing some research in the addictions treatment program that I was a part of for a number of years, about a dozen years of work in the addiction sector. And we actually started tracking the impact of a change in mindfulness over time with our clients. Kind of anecdotally, it started, and then we started to get more serious about it. And we actually found that increased levels of mindfulness over time with our young people directly correlated to significant decreases in a variety of indicators of wellness, or like stress. And so interpersonal relationship stress, symptoms of depression and anxiety, those types of things. And there's a growing and pretty robust body of literature out there that says mindfulness helps everybody with
For sure.
just about everything. So that's great advice. And then the tension piece, leaning into tension and harnessing that tension, because it exists, right? There isn't a team out there. There isn't a relationship out there that doesn't have some tension in it, right? And to ignore it or to deal with it in an unhealthy way doesn't get us through to that like creative space where something new is possible, or a new perspective emerges, or a shared understanding comes out of that. So those are two great pieces.
Yeah, I would just touch on the mindfulness. You asked me what I do. The other two things, and this might be helpful to people. I'm not a big journaler. I tried. My wife's got buckets of journals, and it's so great when she reads back the memories, like and so what I've invested in lately, and it's been working, has been, I'm sure people have heard of the 5-minute journal. You can get the app. It's $4.99. And it's great. It sets reminders in the morning, 3 things you're grateful for. So you start your morning with mindfulness, a little bit of a ritual of mindfulness in the morning. And I tell you, like it starts off the day great. You set some intention for your day. You can take pictures so you can capture those moments, which then could be, part of the journal that you want to share maybe with your kids or whoever. And then at the end of the day, you do your, what did you accomplish and how do you feel? And so that's been a good exercise. I would say I'm like once every 2 days, I'm getting there. But there's definitely something about writing or typing it down that makes it, and going back to it after, that's pretty special.
Yeah, for sure. Makes it a bit more concrete and
Yeah.
less abstract. I think sometimes we get like the gratitude practice becomes like the same thing, because it's like, I'm grateful for my family, I'm grateful for my health, I'm grateful for, but I'm actually just like super grateful for something very specific, right? And I'll have to think about something for this conversation that I'm grateful for. We can do a little gratitude share at the end, maybe.
Yeah. And I'll just say, like, if you got kiddos, this is growth mindset. Do you know this?
We've got a couple of those for the 9-year-old, and we ordered one for a different version for the 6-year-old recently. So
They're amazing. Yeah. Cool.
Awesome. Let's invite any questions or comments that people have. If you're just tuning in to just follow along and listen, that's all great too. But if you have a mindfulness practice that you really enjoy or that helps ground you and anchor you to your life, I'd love to hear about it, because I'm always looking to expand my toolkit, and I'm sure other listeners are as well. So a little share would be great. Or any comments, questions that you have for Pablo that you'd like to know more about his journey, his experiences with health and wellness, and we're going to shift gears at this point into the employee experience and human-centered design. And I use employee experience as a pretty big bucket of conversation, but maybe it's the human-centered design piece. Let's start there around, and we kind of alluded to it with problem solving, and we kind of we dropped it. But what is a human-centered design? And yeah, fill us in as if I don't know anything, because I probably don't.
Yeah, no, you do, Jeff. You do. I think a lot of us do it daily in our lives, just for different things, and it's just now being. It's such a. For me, it's a mindset and a tool, right? So it's a way of thinking, but also a way to move people because they're at the center of it. So that's how I use it in my practice. There's tons of great resources out there, from IDEO to Overlap Associates to Habanero Consulting Group, J5, that are, these are local organizations that, you and I have been working with. And everybody's got their way of explaining how they use it in their practice. So I really like the way, I think it was IDEO, how they explain how these are all, tied together. And so it's about connection, right? So feeling empathy. So I'm feeling with you now in this moment. We're gaining a shared understanding of the experiences that you're going through, whether it's a product, a service, and so forth. So connection is number one, really connecting to that human being that you're designing for at the center. The second part they talk about, which I really agree, is the ideation. And so this is where we get to tap into our beautiful minds, and this is where trust, psychological safety, all of that can just add to this experience. This is where we get to do some divergent thinking, ideation, really have fun. Like for me, that's probably the funnest part of the whole process. You know me, my brain goes everywhere and I love to do divergent thinking, and you and Kim help to converge me. And so that's the second part, ideation. And the third would be, what's called prototyping, but like you and I have experienced it, it's really moving to action. How can we take something and not just try to make it as perfect as possible? It takes a year before we start to put it out. And, how can we make something as fast as possible? You'll hear the terms minimal viable solution, website, product, service. How can we get something out based on what we've learned and ideate it around and start to test and learn more from and iterate? So I would say, human-centered design, it's a mindset for me anyways, and a tool. And it's about building connection. It's about ideating and about building prototypes. So bias to action, getting activation going right away.
What problems does it solve? Like why?
Big, hairy, ambiguous problems. It's
hairy,
great for ambiguity and uncertainty. Yeah.
Which there's no shortage of.
Which there's no shortage of.
In our world. There never has been, but it's amplified now, I think. The pace of change has started to increase, it seems. Can we dig into it a little bit and talk through like some of the, maybe some tips or some resources or some things what are the challenges of human, like maybe let's start there. What if somebody says, okay, let's do a human-centered design process, and I've run a couple of these with clients over the last year or two, and we certainly learn. Like it's a learning process, you learn every time. But what are some of the more common pitfalls that people are going to bump up against when they step into that first phase, which is really that empathetic research, trying to get as close to the kind of the desired user, the human that we've centered in the middle? Maybe that's the first problem. Maybe I answered my own question, is that we actually don't center humans in most of our processes.
There
we
you go.
Center, the needs of a system or the needs of the company. But aside from that, how can we do that phase well? Or what are some of the things that you think about?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned one of them a few minutes ago around like stepping away from problem solving, like truly understanding, like building up empathy for the people you're trying to serve or design for, and truly understanding who they are. So empathy is the number one, right? And I think a lot of organizations, for different reasons, struggle with that. Things I typically hear, oh, we know them. And it's like, okay, you know them as you know them, but imagine like there's other ways we can, through, for example, ethnographic research, we could install ourselves in their homes. We can install, if we're talking about a consumer, or if we're talking about employees, we can observe them in their workplace. There's digital ways to do this too now, given all the COVID challenges. But I think a lot of the time organizations feel like they've done this work and they know it already. And so what I've learned in my experience as a consultant and practitioner in this space is we know what it takes to really to take someone through this experience. And one thing that doesn't work is trying to drag them along this process. And in fact, it's kind of ironic because we need to learn empathy and meet them where they're at, right? And so sometimes it's about validating what they've already done. So I would say a mistake I see is when someone, says, wow, this would be an amazing tool to use for this problem that we have. And they just try to like follow a process or, say apply here, like fill in the blanks. That's not how it works. There's a bit of agility and adaptiveness that is required for it. And that's the beautiful thing. And I think I think our example, Jeff, was, there's this thing called the 5-day design sprint where you can get in there and go through the whole process in 5 days. Well, we realized we weren't going to be able to do that with one of our clients. So we actually came up with the term, I don't think we made it up, I think it's out there, but a design wave, right? So I would say, to answer your question, I think it's the mistake I see people making with this is to say, here it is, here's the formula, the recipe, here's the ingredients, plug and play. That's not how it works. Mm-hmm. That's not designing for human beings.
Yeah, that's just another rigid process that we install. It's like any other planning or design kind of process. It loses its humanness. It loses empathy as soon as you try and get rigid with it and structure and try and force people through it. So that's a great insight, because I think that's probably the temptation, especially when you're first introduced to it. It's like, oh, I just have to ask these questions in this order.
Yes.
Then we move on to phase 2, right? It's like, it doesn't actually work that way.
Yeah,
and I like your piece around validation as well. Like there probably is some information out there, some assumptions that people have, and we can go and validate assumptions. We don't necessarily have to start from scratch. And I always try and go in with like, I don't know anything about this, because usually I don't. Legitimately, I actually have no idea what the experience is like. So fill me in. But if we have some assumptions and best guesses, we can validate those through the research as well.
Yeah, and I would say I've learned it's really important to learn who's leading this work and the culture of the organization, right? Like, what are the commitments they made? What are their beliefs? What are their habits and behaviors? Like, how is this truly like the mindset and tool that's going to work at this time? So just being aware of that as well. It's not always the right, mindset and tool to use. But I think in this time that we're going through right now, it's a very human problem, and I think it's really relevant to solving a lot of the problems that exist right now, or dancing with them.
Yeah, no, for sure. Phase 2. So we've done some empathetic research. We haven't done it too structured. We've been pretty agile with it, and we're stepping into ideation, brainstorming, looking for possible solutions or ideas for solutions. This problem, what are some of the things that teams get stuck in? And you mentioned psychological safety and trust as a bit of an underpinning or a foundation for that process to be effective, or as effective as we want it to be. Can you dig into that a little bit? Can you tell me a bit more about why, like the mechanisms of that, and how, and what maybe some examples of times you've seen that go really well and times that you've seen ideation maybe go poorly or not have the desired effect?
Yeah, I mean, so maybe one step back. Like, I think when we're doing the empathy piece, I think it's important. Where I see teams have some good conflict is around who actually are we designing for? Because a lot of the times it's like designing for us so we can do a better job for them. Which is important to understand what's going to happen in the backstage of things in order for the front experience to be great. But I've seen a lot of teams go back and forth with that. So you mentioned this earlier. I just want to repeat it because I think it's important. Like, asking the right questions to ensure that we're solving the right problem, or at least looking at the right problem. Second is getting very clear on who we're designing for, right? And I think those are conversations that I've seen teams rush through a little bit or get mixed up, and then they realize, I mean, the great thing about design thinking is it's iterative. You can get to a certain point and realize, oh shit, and go back and and follow the process in a way. So moving into ideation, I think, yeah, like you said, like making sure that we create a space for all types of people actually to participate, right? So one thing I've learned is not everybody does great ideation work in a room, with everybody watching,
A
right?
bunch of sticky notes and a whiteboard. Yeah.
Exactly. Some people need time to reflect. Some people are shy, or maybe more introverted and not really as comfortable. And so I think, get to know your team. I love this. I can't remember who said it, but one size fits one. Like, understand who's going to be in those sessions and design that experience specifically for that group, knowing, what is going to be the best way to unleash some of that ideation and creativity. So, and like, for example, you and I get to know the individuals. And remember when we were doing those breakouts, we were thinking, what would that dynamic be like for those individuals? We thought of what can they do together? What can they do apart? Right? What are the different tools we can give them to, I know, moving to the next place to start to build. So I think we, as facilitators we really need to be designing that experience for that team that's going through that process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's that one size fits one. I think I might have mentioned that because I picked it up from a vice principal at a high school that I did a bunch of work with a couple of years ago, and that was her mantra: one size fits one, and that's
Yeah, I love it.
what led their team. And I think it's a very useful perspective because I think teams and leaders get into a one size fits all perspective that actually doesn't fit anybody. Right, like at the end of the day, and I think both of us have probably experienced that in our workplaces before, right? This one size fits all approach that lacks meaning.
Sorry, the other thing I'll add, Jeff, because it's something you've taught me more and more about, is the right use of power. And my knowledge is limited on it, but what I would say is, if it's also for people that are in the room. So if you're a leader and you got to understand your power and what that's going to do to the dynamics within that team. And so it's just something to be aware of, and there's not an answer to it. It's just like, how are people going to engage knowing you're there? And some leaders are like, oh, but I always hear this, they'll say whatever they want to say in front of me. They won't.
Yeah, we know
they
that.
won't. We know that.
Because they tell us as coaches when we go in and we hear all like the inner thoughts of people's heads. We're like, well, why isn't that coming out in the meetings? Right? It's because the boss is sitting in that meeting. That's why it's not getting any air.
One, they're either scared of you. Two, they like you. They want to hurt your feelings, right? And then for so many other reasons. But so I think understanding that power and creating distributed power in those sessions, right? Whatever that's going to take, whether it's like a physical like wand that people psychologically feel empowered in the moment that they hold it to be sharing, or there's other techniques to do that as well. So I think that's super important, is just self-awareness for the teams that are going into these ideation sessions. And the other thing is, the other mistake I see teams making is they right away start to converge. Like, leave the conflict, the critic, the criticizing to later. Like right now, the goal is just get the craziest, biggest ideas out there, because you'll get more than what you expected. Mm-hmm. So that's another one I would say.
Yeah, we actually, I find myself having to establish brainstorming rules with groups of adults where it's like, this is what a brainstorm actually looks like. And this is what we have to do to make it effective, because we're so quick to even self-censor our own ideas, right? We judge our own ideas as we're writing them and see people like crumpling up their stuff. It's like, whoa. You're like, not allowed to do that, right? You gotta get it on the table, because we self-limit accidentally, unintentionally, kind of keep ourselves stuck a little bit in the status quo, because we don't allow ourselves to maybe go to that place of, really big picture ideas and totally, off the wall solutions. So yeah, that's
another thing we hear. Hey Jeff, like some people are like, oh, I'm not creative. That's not me. I'm not that type. It's like, you're a human being. You create every day. So as much as people might hate icebreakers, there's some bad ones. So don't do the bad ones. We could probably share a bunch that we have after with guests. But, a good icebreaker will introduce people to what creativity is truly about, and show them that they have it within them, and will give them the confidence to participate. And so I think that's an important thing to do as well, because I think, we might, some people in the room might limit themselves by saying, oh, that's just not me. But in reality, they've created some of the best, solutions or ideas out there.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure.
Stick
Okay.
people win the game. You know what? I love the saying, and hopefully I get it right. Be childlike, not childish, but childlike.
Childlike with curiosity. And
Yeah.
yeah. Well, there's a really good, it's a study. I don't forget where it's out of. I'll find the study and I'll link it up somewhere. It's the Marshmallow Tower Challenge, where you have to build a marshmallow tower out of spaghetti and marshmallows. And I stopped doing them in workshops because like I've been subjected to so many of them as a participant, and they like
Yeah.
were never that meaningful for me. But there's some really good research around there where they took a bunch of different groups and kindergartners, I think college students,
Lawyers.
CEOs, lawyers, a bunch of different groups, and gave them this challenge: who can build the tallest tower in a certain amount of time. That's it. Like that was the only constraint. And the kindergartners crushed it and like crushed the competition over and over and over again. And it was because of just like wild abandon, lots of creativity, lots of experimentation, lots of like, oh, that's working, let's do more of that, let's break it down, lots of fluid leadership, right? No, like, versus, get a group of CEOs in the room and they're like planning and they're like
Yeah.
delegating and they're making like they're building a structure and a hierarchy around it. And so there's fascinating research out there about creativity and how, like, I think being childlike is probably how we get back to actually doing that better.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you can attest to this. How many lessons have our kids taught us? Hey.
Yeah. For sure. Okay, so we've done some empathy research. We've gotten as close as we can to the challenges that the humans that we're designing for, whether they're clients or customers or employees. We've done some ideation, some brainstorming with a how might we, like big blue sky thinking. And then what? What happens after that? What's the process?
Yeah, then it's I mean, for us, it's I'm trying to think back to the wave we did. We really, I thought we did a great job. Well, the team did a great job of transitioning from that ideation really quickly into prototyping. And so, with prototyping is a really, for me, is also a fun. It's taking those ideas and starting. I think there's a step, obviously, sorry, between prototyping where you start to converge on some of those ideas, and this is where tension, if you've really done well, tension can really lead to some great decisions being made on, what are the ideas we're going to experiment with or prototype with. And so again, it depends on, a multitude of factors like time, budget, but let's just say you can only work on one idea. That's where you're diverging into that one idea and you're starting to, well, what we did, which I think is a cool exercise, was start to paint the art of the possible, which was a step in between. Because I think what we did in our last project is we actually passed it over to a designer. So we needed to capture that story before passing it on. But if a team's going to be doing it, they can likely maybe skip this step. Though I wouldn't. It's pretty fun to do to write these storyboards. Whether they're comic strips or what did we do? There was a couple other different ways. Was it comic strip storyboards?
Mostly comic strips, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean that one, I in my experience works really well. When you give people different tools that they can use to create the storyboard. We did comics because people connect around it. It's funny, but it's also, it gives them an idea of what that experience with a service or a product or an experience is going to be like for the end user they're designing for. And so we then pass that on, and right away it's build. Take what you have and start building. And again, like, it depends what you're building, right? There's great software out there like Figma for building apps and online experiences. You can build using everyday household items, again, being childlike, like cardboard, I can't even, Play-Doh, things like that. It really depends what you wanna prototype with.
But the essence of it is taking that idea and making it real.
Make it real, tangible,
concrete, so that you can then experiment with it, get feedback maybe from intended users, right? Get some, like, there's a feedback cycle or a test and experiment piece.
Yes.
Once you have your prototype.
Yeah, you'll have, I mean, obviously you'll have your core users that you can go back to and say, we listened, we felt with you, and this is where we got to, and we'd love, and walk them through testing, that prototype and engaging and interacting with it. And even that's an art, right? Trying not to lead somebody and just trying to have them struggle. It's tough to watch people struggle, right? And it depends what you're building. You probably don't want them to struggle too much, but just really like observing how they engage with your prototype will teach you a lot. And I think, here's one thing I learned, and I tell you, like, it's great if you can to always have more than one person doing these observations and this creation as well, because again, diversity, just different perspectives. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've heard something and made sense or meaning of it in my mind, only to have my like co-facilitator say, "Well, that's not what I heard," right? So imagine I would have done that on my own, right? So I think yeah, you're taking the prototype, you're testing it, you're getting feedback, and it's an iterative process. And so, I've seen teams say, "Oh crap, we totally missed the ball. Bad idea. Well, good thing we didn't invest all our time, life, and money on this thing. Boom, on to the next thing." That happens less frequently, but it's happened. More so, it's like, "Oh, great, we're so much further than we thought we would be by now." And now it's, how do we move it to that next level? How do we build a team around this? Maybe it becomes a practice. Maybe it becomes a new line, right, for the business. Or maybe you need to go back and actually, iterate on it and make it stronger. But the idea is you're running these experiments and you're learning and innovating on the go.
Yeah, and the big problem that this process and this like mindset and tool kit solves for is ambiguous, uncertain, chaotic environments, and time horizons. Probably like there's
Yes.
an essence of speed in this that a lot of us and a lot of organizations are slow to adapt, right? And so
Yes.
rapidly changing environment, and if your processes aren't as rapid as the environment in which you find yourself in, right, you end up being out of touch, out of sync, and we see that happening all the time. Our institutions can't keep up with the pace of change, and that tension can cause bankruptcies if you're a business, right? You go out of business, right? And if you're a social institution, you struggle with delivering your services, right? Or you can't meet the demands of that have arisen for your services. We're certainly seeing that in the social sector right now with lots of need and kind of some slow moving institutions that govern those. So yeah, I think it is one tool in the toolkit. This design thinking, human-centered design, but I think you're right in that it's a very important one for the time and age that we're living in right now.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, even if you're building technology, even AI systems, like, they all touch human beings. Like, human beings are at the center of everything. Like, I'm sure we could have a debate on that, but at the end of the day, it all comes back to us as the beings on this on this earth. So
And it begs the question: if we're not centering humans, if we're not doing human-centered, like what is it we're centering?
exactly,
What are we putting in there,
exactly.
right?
How are we
And
making people's lives better?
yeah, and when that gets uncomfortable pretty fast when we start asking those questions of leaders. It's like, what exactly? Who is this for? Right?
Yeah,
What are we designing for? That it brings that tension to the surface pretty quick, for sure.
yeah. And here's the thing: like, it's not going to go perfect. It's actually not supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's going to expose gaps, whether they're skill sets or processes or potentially values. But it's also going to expose like things that you do actually really well and you should be doing more of.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the beauty of it. It's kind of like the growth mindset. You're just continually educating yourself and growing, right? Not just you as an individual, but your team, your organization, and it's so powerful. So I've read the book Designing Your Life, actually the end Designing Your Career, which takes a human-centered design approach to your own. And I can tell you right now, like, that's the thing. These things that you will practice at work, you'll be able to carry over into your life, with your own relationships and your own problems, right? In the household or with friends or whatever. And so that's the power of it, is that it's human. It's about us.
Yeah, I'm sure my kids at some point will clue into the fact that I do lots of things with them that I do in my consulting practice.
Yeah.
How might we solve for that? How might we do this?
You're succession planning already.
Totally am. Yeah, work myself out of a job. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, I won't keep you too long. I know I already value the 53 minutes that you spent digging into some of these topics with me. What else do you think is important? Maybe let's spend just a couple of minutes quickly. We'll round this out with leadership, conversation around maybe adaptive capacity, because I know that's a focus for you right now, is to help build adaptive capacity into organizations and into teams. What kind of leadership do we need? What do we need to think about or do with our leadership practice that's going to foster that adaptive capacity? Because it's one thing to give tools like human-centered design, but if they don't get deployed because of leadership's biases or stubbornness or lack of whatever, right? Then, all roads lead to leadership, all roads lead to power. So let's round this conversation out. Let's talk about power and leadership and adaptive capacity.
Oh, geez, that's one way to end off, eh?
I
That's a
know.
big
End with a
topic.
bang. Yeah.
We'll maybe it's just a teaser for the next conversation as well. But yeah, for me, adaptive capacity. I talked about resiliency a lot today. Just as human beings, it's one of our strengths. We just need to tap into. And I think what we've done on our team is we've added someone with a skill set around personal coaching. So I think just really utilizing that skill set to really help leaders break through maybe some biases or mindsets that haven't helped them. Like there's a level of trust we need to build and vulnerability. Like it's I've been on the leadership team for a global organization and for one of the best workplace or the best workplace in Canada for 100 employees and under. Being even in an organization that was flat, that had an amazing culture, as a leader, you feel there's moments where you're alone and you're alienated. And I think so just that's why we call ourselves the ally code. Just having someone or a team of people that have been there for you to allow you to open up and invite your team in to work differently. I think that's the beginning. So start with the leader, start with the culture, because the leader at the end of the day is accountable for the culture. They might have an HR or an employee experience individual like myself who's responsible for working to design and develop the experiences. But at the end of the day, it's like you said, all roads lead to leadership and power. So start there. The adaptive capacity is helping organizations from the inside out and outside in. Like I think it's a holistic approach to build up resiliency. So human-centered design is a great way to be lean and adaptive, because at the end of the day, there are external forces that organization will not be able to control. But if you've got really strong a sense of purpose, right, and alignment with a noble cause or a vision that people are willing to, carry on the torch for when you're gone, and so you've got this direction that everybody's aligned and moving on. I love the analogy of a ship in the ocean, right? Like there's these winds blowing. Well, if you've got adaptive capacity, you know how to use the wind to your advantage or to move with the wind. It might not be a straight line. I think too many companies try to go straight line, right? And then if you've got the skills and the capabilities, you'll understand where the rocks are, right? If you've got tools like human-centered design, you can start to pull up those anchors or cut them loose, the things that are holding you back, right? So I think adaptive capacity, if I think of an analogy, is just being able to, from the individual level, from leadership all the way down to the frontline staff person, to just have that resiliency and that adaptiveness to move with the external forces. Mm-hmm. There's so much more, Jeff. I just had enough for the ship analogy.
That's perfect. And that actually is a good segue into the next time I have you on the show. So we'll just line up a round two where
sounds good.
We'll dig more deeply into the leadership aspect of this, because, I know that's a passion of both of ours, is to improve the leader experience and the team experience at large. But leaders, like you say, it can be a very lonely job, and it can feel like there's a ton of pressure, right? To solve problems, to have the answers, to know what's what. And in an environment, we just don't, right? I've been in that position as a leader, and like, I actually don't know what's going on, and I need the help of my team, or I need the help of somebody else. And so that asking for help, the vulnerability that comes with asking for help, I think, both of us had that experience in our own life with our own health, where we had to access help. And that perspective around help is actually like really awesome. Like help is a wonderful, beautiful thing, right? And I don't have to go it alone, right? Like maybe I'll have to do some reflecting on that. Maybe that's the thing that I'm grateful for, is a new ability of mine that doesn't come naturally to me to ask for help. But that's something that I've been doing more of lately. And you're certainly somebody that I lean on when I need help with various things. And so I thank you for that. And I thank you for joining me on the show tonight. Do you have anything that you're grateful for today that you want to round out the show?
Yeah, I mean, if we're just here on this show, so thanks. I'm grateful for my first opportunity to do one of these. Never done one of these.
Awesome. You did.
Yeah.
You did fantastic.
Oh, thanks. And I'm just grateful to be actually talking about something I care about, right? And working with people that see me for who I am, and yeah, and just on this journey of growth. I think, like, I don't know, some people call it a midlife crisis. I'm 39. I call it an awakening, where I'm starting to actually the best parts of me are hopefully coming out, and it's because I'm around people like you. So I'm grateful for our friendship, Jeff.
Well, thank you. We got to end the show now because I can't top I can't top that as a closing. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate it very much, and I look forward to the journey ahead with you. And I will have you back on the show to dig into lots of other topics that we didn't have time to cover tonight. We could probably chat for a couple hours, and we will, but we'll do it in chunks because it's overwhelming if we do it all at once. And you've got stuff to tend to, and I do as well. So thank you again, and thank you to everybody who tuned in tonight, and anybody who's listening to this after the fact. You can always check out more of this show at jeffcoulard.com/powerful. That's where all the shows get hosted after the fact. And tune in next week for actually a friend of both of ours, Ernest Barbaric. He's going to be on the show next week, and we're going to be digging into this very similar conversation around navigating uncertainty and how do we step into leadership and take ownership of the future. That's a passion of Ernest these days, and so make sure you come back next week, Monday, to listen in on my chat with Ernest Barbaric. Pablo, thank you again so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm excited for that one. I'm going to see you soon, Ernest.